interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zack to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Neat. Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So, this episode, we're actually going to be reviewing, The Hunchback of Nowhere and The Gods Must Be Goosey. I've actually never seen these episodes, but they're actually kind of interesting. So, without further ado, I'm just gonna get into them. So, let's get started. Okay, so this episode, The Hunchback of Nowhere, is a reference, sort of reference to The Hunchback of Notre Dame, if you guys have seen that. I'm not sure if the film was out at the time. I'm not 100%, but I think it was a book first as well, so maybe. But in case this story just tells the story of a hunchback who kind of blows into nowhere and is just kind of looking for a place to spend the night on his journey. And we actually meet him right at the start, but it quickly becomes apparent that nobody wants him because he's ugly. Nobody wants to board him up, take him and board him up and put him in their house. So he eventually keeps walking until he eventually arrives at the Bag Farm, and as they're actually waiting and it's actually raining, Eustace actually hollers at Courage to go get his raincoat, pointing out that he told him 1,000 times to go get his raincoat, but Courage is confused since this is apparently the first time Eustace has actually brought it up. But at which point they actually get a knock at the door, and the Hunchback answers and asks if he can spend the night. But Eustace just freaks out at how ugly he is, and then decides that they actually have no place to actually go and board him. So Eustace just kind of sends him on his merry way and tells him to get lost. And then slams the door in his face. And then tells Courage tells Courage to go get his raincoat. And also, to add to that, he actually pulls out a couple of pop-out eyeball glasses, which are designed to just kind of freak Courage out a little bit. But they're not really glasses, but they're kind of like fake eyeballs that are just like he pops them out and they look kind of like that. But those freak Courage out, and then Courage runs off to the barn to actually go get Eustace's raincoat, and obviously it's raining, so it's very soaking wet and cold. But in any case, he winds up in the house. Actually, winds up finding Eustace's raincoat immediately. But then he starts hearing bells ringing inside the barn. So he goes to investigate and notices that the Hunchback has actually set up shop in the barn and is actually playing with his bell set. And Courage decides to actually stop and watch for a minute, and even plays with the bells a little bit himself, and the two quickly become fast friends. And also to kind of show Courage kind of a fun time, he actually sets up a trapeze act in the middle. The Hunchback actually sets up a trapeze act in the middle of the barn, and then swings Courage around a bit, which freaks Courage out, but he's in no real danger. But eventually they lay him back at the bell set and they continue to play and for a little bit and they actually hit it off. But then Eustace barges into the barn demanding to know where Courage is, and more to the point where Courage's raincoat is gone. So Courage hides the Hunchback in one of the hay piles in the barn and tells him that he'll be back in a bit. At which point he comes down to actually talk to Eustace, and Eustace asks Courage where his raincoat is. So Courage goes back up to get it, and the Hunchback hands it off to them before Courage brings it back down. And Eustace, as a thank you for Courage bringing him his raincoat, once again uses the pop-out eyeball trick again to freak Courage out a little bit. And Courage freaks out, and then Eustace just kind of laughs to himself about it and about how scary Courage is. And also, this is one of the few times he's actually referred to Courage by name. He actually hollers for Courage by name and wonders where he is in this sequence. But in any case, after he leaves the barn, the Hunchback comes back out of hiding and points out that Eustace is very mean to Courage, and points out that he really shouldn't be, and that he shouldn't pick on Courage as much as he does. And then to kind of make Courage feel better, he actually pulls out a flashlight and they start doing hand puppets. Starting with the Hunchback actually doing a perfect imitation and shadow puppet of Eustace and just kind of making fun of the fact that he calls Courage stupid dog. Which causes Courage to laugh and feel a little bit better, and then they spend the rest of the night making puppet shadows with the flashlight. In any case, the next morning, Courage walks into the house to go eat breakfast. And Muriel is happy to see him, pointing out that she was a little bit worried that he would freeze to death in the barn, but is happy that he's all right. At which point, Courage decides to introduce her to the Hunchback, and as in contrast to her husband, Muriel is a lot more welcoming of the Hunchback being in their house, and is far happy to have met a new friend of Courage, and brings him and actually does let him come into the house and eat breakfast with them. At which point, Eustace walks in to eat his breakfast, and seeing the Hunchback sitting at the table, he freaks out a bit and then yells at the Hunchback to get out of his house, pointing out that he reiterating his previous point that they had no room for him, which is a lie, since obviously the Hunchback spent the entire night in the barn and is completely fine living there. But Muriel merely yells at Eustace to show some manners and hospitality, pointing out that obviously it's going to be fine and that it's a friend of Courage. But Eustace merely points out that makes it worse. But Muriel points out that she'll sweeten the deal by bringing Eustace some of his favorite blueberries that he likes to eat to go with his breakfast. So Eustace decides to just kind of grumble a little bit and just sit down. At which point he decides to start hurling insults at the Hunchback to try and make him feel bad by basically calling him ugly. But with Courage's help, the Hunchback then proceeds to start throwing back insults about how Eustace is bald. Which causes Eustace to become increasingly upset with him, and they keep throwing those insults back at each other until eventually Muriel gets upset with Eustace over it and asks him if he has any sort of hospitality. But when Eustace unironically responds that he doesn't, she then kicks him out and makes him eat in the chicken coop. But as Eustace is about to leave to go to the chicken coop, he then tries to appeal to Muriel's good nature by pointing out that the Hunchback called him bald. To which point she just replies that it's not an insult if it's true, and points out that he is indeed bald. So with that, he kind of grumbles and goes off to the chicken coop. And then later that night, it's actually dinner time, and Eustace is hollering for Muriel to make food because he's hungry. But she is nowhere to be found, and he actually can't hear him. And eventually, he decides to go outside to look for her. And discovers that she's actually sitting in a rocking chair with a umbrella, and is actually watching a concert from the Hunchback and Courage, who are playing with the bell set, just showing off. But Eustace demands to know what she's doing, and she merely responds that she's watching the concert, and which Eustace is kind of upset with, mainly because he's hungry and she's not making dinner yet. But he also notices that the Hunchback is actually wearing his raincoat, which is the last straw for Eustace, and he actually runs up to the roof of the barn to actually get his raincoat back, and tells the Hunchback once again to leave. At which point he starts blaming Courage for bringing the Hunchback into his house, pointing out that it's always his fault, and once again tries to terrorize Courage with the eyeball trick. But by this point, the Hunchback has had enough of Eustace and actually gives him a taste of his own medicine, telling him that he's always mean to Courage and asks what the poor dog ever did to him. And Eustace is a little terrified that the Hunchback is kind of coming after him, and also is partially terrified by how ugly he is. But the Hunchback merely responds that he hasn't seen the ugly yet, and then proceeds to pull out a mask that looks exactly like Eustace's face, and brings it back to him, calling him stupid dog to his face, which causes Eustace to actually panic, and then he falls off the roof of the barn and hurts himself. Although Courage and the Hunchback do try to catch him, he does fall off the roof and gets seriously hurt, and he kind of learns his lesson at the end of that. At which point, once the rain stops, the Hunchback decides it's time to go on his merry way, and thanks Courage and Muriel for their hospitality, and hopes that he'll actually meet more people like them someday. And Courage and Muriel actually do thank him back, pointing out that he's no doubt about going to find somebody else that's kind, and at which point he and Courage play with their bells one last time, and then the Hunchback leaves. So Yeah, this episode is kind of interesting in that the Hunchback actually shows up and kind of just rips Eustace a new ass for being mean to Courage the whole time. That is mainly what this episode was. It's somebody finally stands up to Eustace and tells him that he shouldn't be picking on Courage all that much. Eustace is going to go back to being mean to Eustace regardless after the Hunchback leaves, but it is important to note that this episode marks the first time somebody has actually called Eustace out on his shit. So yeah, it is pretty interesting for that reason, and I do kind of like it for that. We actually have a character who actually stands up for Courage and actually takes his side, and actually tells Eustace to back down. And Eustace obviously doesn't listen, but it is nice to see somebody actually stand up for Courage in this episode, and it kind of is one of my new favorites, because it just shows you. It just kind of shows the Hunchback finally giving Eustace his just desserts after so long. But in any case, that's my review of that episode. Onward to the next one. Okay, so this episode, The Gods Must Be Goosey, is actually really funny because, long story short, there's a goose who's also a god, and he falls in love with Muriel and wants her to make her his wife, but and I think you can see the problem since he's married to Eustace. So it does start off with the Goose God actually proclaiming that he's lonely and wants to find love, and he doesn't even know the first place to look, because obviously he's a god. He doesn't know how to talk to women, like, at all. But as he's actually hovering over the bag farm and actually notices their sees them all going about their business, he actually sees Muriel taking her plants out to actually getting some suns and some rain so that they can actually grow up to be big and strong, because they're kind of withering a little bit and they need it. And the goose is so moved by her quote unquote beauty that he actually helps that her flowers actually grow spontaneously and on the spot, which freaks Courage out a little bit because that's obviously a very supernatural thing and isn't supposed to be a thing. Courage tries to figure out what exactly is going on. And Muriel actually goes back inside. And meanwhile, while they're both going inside and trying to figure out what's going on, or at least while Courage is trying to figure it all out, the Goose God actually proclaims that he's never felt like this about any woman before, and wonders if it would be appropriate for God to take a mortal woman to be his bride. And it kind of sort of is. If you've ever seen any sort of mythology thing ever, you'll know that that's kind of a recurring thing throughout all of them, that gods just show up. They take a mortal woman for a one-night stand, and then demigods happen. That's been a recurring thing in mythology for a long-ass time, so it's probably fine. But in any case, it's at that point where the goose decides to give it a shot and actually shows up in a chariot made of clouds with a box of chocolates and some flowers. And the Goose God goes to knock on the door and gets ready to actually proclaim his love for Muriel, and Courage actually sees him show up in his chariot and tries to warn Muriel about what's going on, believing him to be dangerous, but Muriel just kind of brushes it off since she feels like he just saw a bird. But in any case, Courage then proceeds to bring Muriel out to actually go and see the Goose God. But the Goose God panics when he sees Muriel coming to the door and actually goes to hide in a rain barrel. And Muriel just concludes that Courage was actually just seeing a bird, which isn't wrong, but she kind of dismisses it and leaves and goes back inside to go sit down. At which point the Goose God proclaims that he needs to actually be a bit more of a man, or he's never going to be able to win Muriel's affections. And in the process actually throws away his gifts, which Courage winds up catching, and she actually tries to bring them into Muriel, who has since gone on to make some tea, and tries to bring them to her, but she can't. But he doesn't know where they are. At which point Eustace actually comes in looking for his wrench and screwdriver, since a recurring thing throughout the episode is that he's actually trying to fix the horn to his truck, and he needs his tools to do that, but when he comes in, he actually sees that Courage is carrying gifts, and takes them from him, wondering what they are. It's at this point where Muriel walks in, sees Eustace holding the gifts, assume he got them, and then embraces him, saying that they're lovely and that he's really is a sweetheart when he wants to be. Although Courage tries to say that she's wrong, pointing out that obviously the Goose God was the one who got them, and Courage is trying to tell her that fact, but then she receives a knock at the door, and she goes to investigate, and the Goose God actually opens the door, is actually standing at the door and answers, having regained his nerve, and tries to actually figure out, tries to actually let her know how he feels. He professes his love for her, and then as a show of his love, he waves his hands, and the entire bag farm is covered in a field of flowers, which Muriel points out is lovely, but she also kind of lets him down a little bit gently, pointing out that she is very much spoken for, and that she really can't accept his love, and with that she goes back inside. At which point the Goose God actually waves his hand again, and the flowers all die. And Courage quickly realizes that he needs to do something, because as Eustace actually comes into the room to ask who it was. She merely says that it was admirer, but that she let him down gently. But the Goose God actually doesn't take no for an answer, and actually slips a handwritten love note under the door, which is a poem he wrote for her. And the poem kind of makes Courage disgusted a little bit, because it's very lovey-dovey language, and it's very high-class lovey-dovey stuff. So Courage kind of is disgusted by it. So, but Muriel just responds that it's probably fun, that's probably nothing, and that she just remarks how sweet it is. And Courage quickly realizes that he needs to actually get Eustace to actually fight for his woman. So he actually brings the letter to Eustace, who just blows his nose into it. At which point the Goose God actually shows up again and tries to once again woo Muriel with his love, actually bringing her some more gifts. At which point Courage tries to go to Eustace, and realizing that the Goose God is actually playing music. That is actually playing music for her. He actually needs Eustace to actually fight for his woman and actually play music for Muriel as well. But Eustace just scares him off with his voodoo mask, and Courage quickly realizes that Eustace is going to be no help in this endeavor, so he resolves instead to just make it look like Eustace is giving her all of these gifts. So what he does is he takes Eustace's hat and uses it to make it look like that he's actually playing the harp, which Muriel finds lovely. But then the Goose God blows ice on Courage and actually freezes him in place, and then sings a song for her from his cloud perch. So Courage tries to do something as well, similar to that. He actually copies what the Goose God is doing, and actually brings her a picture of Muriel and Eustace together, and then proceeds to actually try and copy his song, which the Goose God just kind of pushes Courage off to the side, and then proceeds to bring a whole bunch of food and gifts, which Muriel then starts eating. And at which point Courage realizes he needs to figure out something real fast, and actually uses a cutout of Eustace and a record player to actually kind of make it look like Eustace is dancing for her, but which doesn't work because he ultimately falls through the cutout. At which point the Goose God, believing he's actually bested Courage, decides to actually tell Muriel how he feels again, and about how he wants her to be his queen, and basically live immortal with him up in his clouds. But she merely tells him that her place is there with the man she loves, and that she hopes he'll find love again one day, but encourages him to actually look elsewhere. At which point Courage shows up with a suitcase and tells him to hit the road. But the Goose God isn't willing to take no for an answer, and decides that if he isn't going to be able to win Muriel's love through conventional means, then he's just going to kidnap her and make her his bride by force. So At which point Courage realizes that he needs to get Eustace's attention to actually get him to step in and defend his wife. Sure enough, since Eustace has been working on the horn the whole time, Courage figures that it's probably working by now. So he goes into the cab of the truck and actually starts honking at Eustace, which causes him to pass out and freak out, because obviously he's in the engine block, and that's where the horn is. So it's very loud in his ear, and he passes out from that. At which point Courage then proceeds to spam the horn to actually get Eustace to wake up. But the Goose God hears all of this. He hears the commotion and long story short, he falls in love with Eustace's truck. He falls in love with Eustace's truck because it honks like a quote-unquote goose. So he decides to make the truck his bride instead, and which Courage then realizes he may have overstepped, since obviously he believed that Goose God was actually talking to him. But in any case, he decides to leave the cabin out of the car before the Goose God carries it back up into the clouds. And shortly after, Muriel and Courage actually get a letter saying that they're actually being invited to a wedding, and that it's actually a wedding between the Goose God and Eustace's truck, which is really, really funny, but not so much for Eustace, because as it turns out, in a rare display of affection, Eustace loves his truck more than anything else, and that includes his wife. So yeah, he actually is sobbing to himself, wondering if his truck will ever come back to him. So yeah, clearly. So yeah, the main thing about to take away from this episode is that Eustace really loves his truck more than any man should. More than his wife, more than anybody else. He doesn't really like people all that much, but all he really cares about is his truck. So yeah, that's kind of how the episode ends. Eustace loses the love of his life, if you can call it that. But in any case, yeah, those are my reviews of Courage the Cowardly Dog. What did you guys think? Let's get discussing on in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on with the channel, as well as some other things that I post over there, then just be sure to follow me over there. And also, if you want to see more content from me, there's actually 2 ways you can do that. One is by checking out my Twitch down in the description below as well. I'm streaming horror games for the entire month of October. They're going to be shorter-ish horror games, so if you guys want to check those out, by all means, link is down in the description. Be sure to check those out. And the other way you can actually see more content from me is by actually checking out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one, and it may or may not be Courage related. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me, and again, it may or may not be Courage related. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. And also consider supporting me on Patreon, because obviously this is a massive project for the month of October. So if you want to help support future projects like this, then be sure to go check that out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!